Most people think the most dangerous earthquake zone in America is the San Andreas Fault. It is not. There's another fault, one most people have never even heard of, and this year, scientists confirmed it is the single most dangerous one in the entire country. It sits under the homes, the freeways, and the water pipes of millions of people right now, and today, we are going to show you exactly why. The most dangerous earthquake zone in America right now is not the San Andreas. It is not the 800-mile crack that Hollywood turned into a disaster movie. The single most dangerous fault in the United States runs directly under one of the most crowded corners of the country, under the freeways, the water pipes, and the bedrooms of the San Francisco Bay Area. It is called the Hayward Fault. And this year, the scientific picture of just how dangerous it is changed again. It has now been 158 years since this fault last broke, on a foggy October morning back in 1868. The average gap between its major earthquakes is roughly 150 years. Do that math. And you understand why scientists keep using one word to describe it: overdue. When it broke in 1868, about 24,000 people lived nearby, and around 30 of them died. Today, nearly 2.8 million people live directly along that same fault line. And a United States Geological Survey scenario estimates that the next major rupture could kill roughly 800 people, injure 18,000, and cause $82 billion in damage. Today, we are going to break down exactly what is going on, where it is most dangerous, and whether things could get even worse. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts and the real stakes. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever felt a real earthquake? Where were you, and what did it feel like the moment the ground moved? If you want to know every time something major happens with this fault, subscribe. It is completely free, and a like helps this reach more people who need to see it. Now, let us get into it. To understand why scientists are watching this fault so closely, you have to go back to the last time it let go. The date was October 21st, 1868. The time was 7:53 in the morning. A cold fog sat over the eastern shore of San Francisco Bay, the kind that blurs the hills and muffles every sound. In the small towns along the base of those hills, people were doing normal things, lighting stoves, milking cows, walking to work on dirt roads. Then, with no warning at all, the ground moved. It did not start gently. People described a sound first, a deep, rolling roar coming up out of the earth, and then a jolt hard enough to knock people off their feet. The shaking lasted more than 40 seconds. That does not sound like much on paper. Try counting it out loud while picturing the floor under you cracking and heaving, and it becomes one of the longest moments a person can live through. Frightened people ran into the streets, animals panicked and bolted, and along a line stretching about 20 miles, the ground itself split open. This is the part that makes a Hayward Fault earthquake different from an ordinary quake. The fault did not just shake the surface, it tore it. The two sides slid past each other by about 6 feet in a matter of seconds. Roads that had been straight the day before were now split apart. Fences ended in midair. Cracks ran through fields in a nearly straight line, tracing the exact path of the fault. This was the moment the fault showed itself, not as a line on a map, but as a living crack in the ground that could move whole pieces of the world sideways. Here's a question that might surprise you. If the Hayward Fault cannot even produce the biggest earthquake in the country, why do scientists call it the most dangerous one? That sounds like a contradiction, but once you understand the answer, you will never think about earthquake risk the same way again. Let us be honest about the numbers first. The Hayward Fault is not capable of the biggest earthquake in America. It cannot come close. The Cascadia subduction zone off the Pacific Northwest coast can produce a magnitude 9 earthquake, one that releases more than 100 times the energy the Hayward Fault is capable of. The San Andreas can produce a magnitude 8. On raw size alone, the Hayward Fault, which tops out around a magnitude 7, does not even make the podium. So why does it sit at the very top of the danger list? Because being dangerous is not just about how hard something can shake. It comes down to 3 things stacked on top of each other: how big the quake can be, how many people are standing directly above it, and what kind of ground those people are actually standing on. On the second and third of those, the Hayward Fault stands completely alone. Start with location. The Hayward Fault runs for about 74 miles through the East Bay, and it does not politely curve around the cities. It runs straight through the middle of them. Its path passes directly under Oakland, Berkeley, San Leandro, Hayward, and Fremont, threading through some of the most crowded land in the western United States. Roughly 2 million people live close enough to feel severe shaking when it breaks. In a very real sense, this fault does not run near the cities. The cities were built directly on top of it. To understand what kind of fault this is, picture 2 massive slabs of the Earth's crust sliding past each other side by side, like 2 moving sidewalks going in opposite directions. Geologists call this a strike-slip fault. The Pacific side is slowly creeping north past the North American side, at a rate of about 2 centimeters a year, roughly the same speed your fingernails grow. Most of the time, the two sides are locked together by friction, and pressure builds up quietly underground, like a spring being wound tighter and tighter. When the friction finally gives way, all of that stored pressure releases at once. That sudden release is the earthquake. Here's where a key difference comes in, and it explains this fault's entire danger in one sentence. There's a real difference between magnitude and intensity. Magnitude is the total energy an earthquake lets out, one single number for the whole event. Intensity is how hard the ground actually shakes at your exact location, and that depends heavily on how close you are to the break and what you happen to be standing on. A magnitude 7 earthquake directly under your feet can shake you far harder than a magnitude 8 that happens far out at sea. That is the entire threat of the Hayward fault in one sentence. It does not need to be the biggest earthquake in America. It only needs to happen exactly where the people are. But here's a strange and important detail about this fault specifically. In many places, it does not stay fully locked. It creeps. The two sides slide past each other slowly and continuously, just a few millimeters a year with no earthquake at all. And you can actually see this happening with your own eyes. Curbs along certain streets in Hayward and Fremont are slowly bending sideways. Sidewalks are cracking in a clean diagonal line. Most famously, the University of California's Memorial Stadium in Berkeley was built directly across the fault. The fault is slowly pulling the massive concrete structure apart, splitting it a little more every year. This creep is proof written right into the pavement that the fault is alive and moving right now. But it is a warning, not a comfort, because this slow slipping does not release nearly enough pressure to stop the big one. It just confirms that the machine underneath the streets is still running. There's one number I need you to actually sit with before we go any further, because it is easy to read past it without letting it sink in. In 1868, when this fault last broke, about 24,000 people lived in the East Bay. Today, the United States Geological Survey says the number of people at risk from this exact same fault is roughly 100 times greater than it was back then. Read that again. Not double. Not 10 times. 100 times. These are not just numbers on a page, they are human beings, and the scale of what could happen has grown far beyond anything this fault has ever actually been tested against. To understand what that could really mean, the USGS and its partners built something ambitious. They created a detailed, scientifically grounded scenario of a magnitude 7 earthquake striking the Hayward fault, and they traced the consequences hour by hour. They called it Haywired, a name that combines Hayward with the idea of a wired, deeply connected modern society. That name is the whole point of the story because the real danger here is not just the shaking on its own, it is about how everything we depend on is connected, and how one fault slipping for a few seconds could pull all of it apart at the same time. The headline numbers alone are heavy. In the Haywired scenario, a magnitude 7 quake on this fault results in roughly 800 deaths, injures about 18,000 people, and causes around $82 billion in direct building damage, before you even start counting the wider economic losses that ripple out for years. But the deaths and the dollar figures are only the beginning of the story, because of that one word, wired. Think about water. Several of the major pipelines that carry drinking water to millions of East Bay residents cross directly over the Hayward fault. When the fault slips several feet in seconds, those pipelines do not bend gracefully around the movement, they snap. That sets off a chain reaction this region has already lived through once before. In 1906, the fires that burned much of San Francisco to the ground were made so much worse because broken water mains left firefighters standing helpless with empty hoses while the city burned around them. The Haywired scenario projects hundreds of separate fires breaking out across the East Bay in the hours after the main shock. At the exact moment the water system needed to fight them is most likely to have already failed. Now stack everything else that crosses that same fault line on top of that. Natural gas lines, electrical power lines, major freeways carrying hundreds of thousands of cars every day. The BART rail system, which moves the region's commuters, runs through a tube that crosses the fault directly. A single rupture does not cause one problem and then move on to the next. It causes water failure, fire, transportation collapse, power loss, and gas leaks, all cascading into each other, all at the same time, across a region of millions of people. That is what wired really means. In a modern city, the very systems that make daily life possible are also the systems most likely to fail together, each failure making the next one worse. And the damage does not stop when the shaking stops. In the Haywired scenario, the main quake is followed by a long stretch of aftershocks, some strong enough to bring down buildings already cracked and weakened by the first hit. Water service to parts of the East Bay could be disrupted for weeks, and in the hardest hit areas for months. Tens of thousands of people could be pushed out of damaged homes. There's also a factor no one can control, and that is timing. The 1868 quake struck just before 8 in the morning, right as the region was waking up. A weekday rupture would catch the freeways jammed with cars, schools full of children, and office towers full of workers. A quake in the middle of the night would catch millions of people asleep inside the older, unretrofitted buildings that are most likely to fail. Scientists cannot choose that hour, and neither can we. There is real progress worth mentioning here, too. California has some of the strictest building codes on Earth, written directly from the lessons of past disasters, and countless buildings across the Bay Area have already been retrofitted to survive strong shaking. That progress is real, and it will genuinely save lives when the next big one hits. But here is the honest part that has to be said clearly. Preparation reduces the toll. It does not erase it. There is one question everyone watching this video actually wants answered, and it is the one question science genuinely cannot answer. When? And here we have to be completely honest, because this is exactly where responsible science and internet fear part ways. No scientist on Earth can tell you the day, the month, or even the year the Hayward fault will rupture. There is currently no reliable way to predict the exact timing of an earthquake. It remains one of the hardest unsolved problems in all of science. Anyone who hands you a specific date is either guessing or trying to sell you something. The fear should live in the facts, not in a fake prediction. What scientists can do is measure the odds, and the odds are what keep them up at night. Here is what the record actually shows. The last 5 major earthquakes on the Hayward fault happened at intervals averaging roughly 140 to 150 years apart. The last one was in 1868. That makes it 158 years and counting, already past the long-term average, which is exactly why the word overdue keeps showing up in official reports. A major working group on California earthquake probabilities calculated a 33% chance of a magnitude 6.7 or greater earthquake on the Hayward fault within the next 30 years. Sit with that for a second. A 1 in 3 chance on this single fault within the span of an ordinary home mortgage. A 2018 United States Geological Survey report concluded in plain terms that the fault may be ready to produce another earthquake, somewhere in the range of magnitude 6.8 to 7. And the Hayward fault is only one of several major faults running through the region. The same working group found there is roughly a 72% chance of a damaging magnitude 6.7 or greater earthquake striking somewhere in the greater San Francisco Bay Area within 30 years. Somewhere, on some fault, the shaking is very close to a coin flip within a single generation. And this year, that scientific picture sharpened even further, which is the real reason this fault is back in the headlines. Scientists at 2 major national laboratories used some of the most powerful supercomputers in the country to simulate 50 different possible magnitude, 7 earthquakes on the Hayward fault. Not one hypothetical quake, 50 of them, each with slightly different rupture behavior, to map out the realistic range of how the ground would actually move across the Bay Area. This kind of work does not predict the future, but it does something arguably more useful. It tells us in fine detail exactly what we are preparing for, and the results reinforce the warning rather than easing it. A dense population sitting on a loaded fault faces the real potential for damage across the entire region, and now scientists can see, block by block, roughly where the worst of that shaking would land. So what exactly are scientists watching right now? The Hayward fault is one of the most closely monitored faults on the entire planet. A dense network of seismometers records even the tiniest tremors along its length, the microscopic creaks and pops that hint at stress shifting underground. Instruments called creep meters measure the fault's slow, steady slip down to a fraction of a millimeter. Satellite sensors and ground instruments track exactly how the land on either side is bending, revealing where the fault is locked and building pressure versus where it is quietly slipping. None of this can tell us the day of the next rupture. What it does is build the clearest possible picture of a fault under stress, so that when the ground finally does move, the early warning systems, the emergency planners, and the scientists are as ready as they possibly can be. And keep one more thing in mind, because California has more than one clock ticking. Just this year, a separate study focused on Southern California modeled the massive stress that has been quietly building on the San Andreas fault system. Some of it building for the better part of 1,000 years. The USGS has estimated roughly a 75% chance of a magnitude 7 earthquake striking Southern California within the next 30 years. The Hayward fault may be the single most dangerous fault in the country because of exactly who lives on top of it, but it is far from the only major fault in the state that scientists are urgently watching right now. So let us bring this all the way back down to the ground and separate the real danger from the movie version, because the difference matters more than almost anything else in this story. California is not going to crack off and fall into the ocean. The San Andreas is not going to yawn open and swallow Los Angeles. That is Hollywood, not geology. Strike slip faults slide sideways past each other. They do not open up into bottomless cracks, and no earthquake on Earth can drop an entire state into the sea. If that fear has been sitting quietly in the back of your mind, you can set it down right now because it simply is not real. But here's the danger that is real, and it is quieter and far closer than anything a movie screen could show you. It is a magnitude 7 earthquake, not the biggest kind, not a record breaker, just an ordinary large quake, striking a fault that runs directly beneath the homes of millions of people, most of whom have no idea it is even there. That is the entire point of this video. The Hayward fault is the most dangerous zone in America, not because of the size of the shake, but because of who is standing on top of it when it finally comes. So I will leave you with the same question I asked at the very start, because your answers are genuinely the best part of this channel. Have you ever felt a real earthquake? Where were you? And what did it feel like the exact moment the ground moved beneath you? Tell me your story in the comments below. If this breakdown was worth your time, honestly, helps more than you would think. And let us hit our like goal so this reaches the people who actually need to see it. Subscribe if you want to be the first to know the next time the Earth does something it is not supposed to. See you in the next one.